19th century Kerala theater was an incredibly serious affair. If you went to a performance, you were met with elaborate, severe costumes and stories of epic battles between ancient gods and demons. The literary and artistic scene was dictated by stern scholars, enforcing strict Sanskrit rules. If you were writing poetry or putting on a play, your subjects were exclusively flawless kings and untouchable deities. Absolute perfection was the only acceptable standard. But that relentless perfection left the everyday audience out in the cold. People sitting in the crowds didn't always want to be preached to from a pedestal. They craved something they actually recognized, something unpretentious and relatable. Enter a man named Kochu Namburi. He wasn't the era's most decorated scholar, but he had something much more dangerous: lethal comedic timing and a total lack of reverence for the establishment. When he stepped onto the traditional Shastrakkali stage, he brought a specific weapon. He took the highly symmetrical, sacred literary tropes the audience knew by heart and shattered the structure right in front of them. Kochunamboori realized a basic truth of comedy. The best way to get a roaring laugh out of a crowd was to take the most sacred rules of art and drag them straight into the mud. Consider the classical Keshadi Padam. In classical Indian poetry, this was the ultimate rulebook for describing a heroine. It required a highly romanticized, head-to-toe inventory of a woman's physical, flawless beauty. Kochunamboori took this sacred framework and applied it to a stage persona he created called the Vriddha, the old woman. He followed the classical poetic meter perfectly, but the details were entirely wrong. Instead of hair adorned with fragrant flowers, he described her 5-inch-long hair as swarming with lice and eggs, comparing it to ants swarming a pile of sugar. He kept going. The heroine's eyes weren't lotus petals, they were discarded mango pits rolled in butter. Her cheeks weren't glowing moons, but 2 upside-down tortoise shells. By violently mocking the highest standard of poetic beauty, he gave the crowd exactly what they wanted. He proved that watching perfection get dismantled is wildly more entertaining than staring at it. He didn't stop at poetic tropes, he went directly after the heavyweights. Kochu Namburi was a legendary poet in Malayalam literature, a figure whose works were treated with absolute reverence. One of Nambiyar's famous verses features a beautiful conversation between Lord Shiva and goddess Parvathy. Parvathy asks about the sacred river Ganga resting beautifully on Shiva's head, and they exchange elegant dialogue matching their serene, idealized faces. Kochu Namburi rewrote the entire scene. In his version, the divine exchange becomes a petty, bitter domestic squabble between an annoyed wife and her aging husband. Parvathy points to his head and asks why it looks like a broken well, and instead of the sacred river, Shiva has to explain that the lumps on his head aren't turtles and frogs, but just his really ugly face. Stripping away the divinity allowed the audience to see themselves in the story, transforming the stage from a temple into a town square. Even the very beginning of a performance wasn't safe. Traditionally, actors opened with an invocatory shloka, a strict meter reserved exclusively for praising ancient deities before the show began. Kochunamboori played a character known as the witty, or the fool. As the fool, he hijacked this sacred meter. Instead of bowing to the gods, he used it to praise the bizarre quirks of local life and brand new technology. He chanted high poetic praises to the latest news arriving from Madras, to the speed of telegraphs, and to passenger trains, offering them his deepest devotion as if they were the new gods of the era. And this wasn't limited to rehearsed material. Offstage, he regularly traded competitive poetic letters with his friend, the great poet Venmani Mahan Namboodiripad. He could instantly complete complex samasyas, strict fill-in-the-blank poetic puzzles, with brutal, hilarious punchlines. These rapid-fire parodies required a mastery of the very rules they mocked, turning a scholar's expertise into a comedian's edge. To execute a perfect parody of Kochunamboori, or to flawlessly invert the meter of a classical Keshadi Padam, you have to actually master the classical mechanics first. Kochunamboori had that deep literary knowledge, but instead of using it to elevate himself above the masses, he used it to bring high art down to the everyday people in the crowd. By forcing industrial machines and messy domestic life into the classical canon, he expanded the boundaries of what was considered literary on the Kerala stage. Kochunamboori's legacy shows that poetic genius is found in the creation of high art and in the cleverness required to dismantle it.